Welcome back, my friends. I'm the Book Guy, and for the last few weeks, we have been focusing on sci-fi book series that you might like to read. Today, we're finally getting to the most requested series, Sun Eater by Christopher Ruocchio. There's 6 large books in this series, with the 7th and final book coming this November. Now, you should know up front, this series has some intense fans. The people who love Sun Eater love it a lot. Yet, other people read these books and are underwhelmed and not really impressed. Personally, I liked a lot of things in these books, but found other things really frustrating. So why is there a bit of a divide here? Well, because Sun Eater is a strong flavour. Think of it like spicy food. Some will love it and some will not enjoy it. This series is not a boring, crowd-pleaser, cookie-cutter Marvel Cinematic Universe story that appeals to everyone. This is a specific taste that appeals to specific people. So forgive me for the clickbait title of bad or brilliant, but that is a question you've got to ask yourself today. Is this series going to be bad for me or perfect for me? That's why I'm going to pitch this series objectively, spoiler-free, just listing all the strengths and weaknesses to help you decide if the flavor suits you. I want the right people to find this series and love it, and I want others to know if this is not right for them. Both options are fine. Before we begin, I have 2 little heads up. Sorry for the long intro today. First, this series has a lot of religious themes. Christopher Ruocchio is quite openly Catholic, and he explores themes of Catholicism in this series. So today we're going to have a critical, nuanced discussion about how those themes impact the story. But I'm not criticizing Catholicism itself. I'm sorry to make a big deal, but this happens every time I discuss religious themes in books. People have meltdowns in the comments trying to defend Christianity from me, or they fill my emails with desperate pleas to bring me back to the flock and assure me that Jesus loves me. Can we all just save ourselves a lot of time and agree not to do that?
We don't do that here.
And don't do it ironically to troll me either. Why did I say that? Now that's exactly what's going to happen. Look, my point is we're simply having a discussion about how these themes are incorporated into the book from a writing perspective. And I do this for all themes, religious or non-religious alike. Secondly, the series explores the concept of miracles. And this was a major highlight for me reading the series because miracles are divine intervention or Deus Ex Machina, which is usually a huge no-no in the writing world. And yet we have a few instances of it here that work really well. So today we're doing a massive tangent on how to write Deus Ex Machina, how this rule can be broken in interesting ways, what makes it work, why doesn't it work? And yeah, this topic should probably be its own video, but I don't care, I'm putting it here. So that discussion is coming later as well. But okay, sorry that took a while. Let's get into the series and see if it's going to be right for you. Hadrian Marlowe is the Sun Eater. He once blew up a sun, causing it to go supernova and swallow whole planets, destroying countless billions of lives. Hadrian is considered a monster and yet a hero. Why did he do this? Well, Hadrian Marlowe is an old man now, and he's finally going to write down the story of his life. A young Hadrian is born into a powerful house, one of the few ruling elite that lead the galaxy-spanning Solan Empire. The ruling class is genetically engineered to be stronger, smarter, and live longer lives than the commoners known as plebeians. In this brutal empire, only the strong survive. After all, humanity is at war with a mighty alien race, the Cielcin. These aliens see humans as food and will literally cannibalize entire planets. The war with the Cielcin has been spanning centuries. Therefore, humanity must be strong and brutal to face this great threat. Yet even as a young man, Hadrian questions the fairness of this world. Does life have to be so cruel for so many? Does the endless war have to continue? Maybe there's another way. So this young, idealistic man begins a journey from his privileged life into outer space, searching for a way to bring peace, unaware of just how much he has left to learn. Well, now let's address the elephant in the room. Yeah, everyone agrees that Book 1, Empire of Silence, is not the best. Even die-hard fans will admit this and tell new readers that they got to push through Book 1. And yes, that was certainly the case for me. What's so rough about Book 1? Well, first, it's the overwhelming similarity to Dune. Now, normally I will staunchly defend fantasy and sci-fi books that are criticized for being too similar, because people are overly judgmental about that sort of thing in these genres. I think it's perfectly fine for books to be similar if the concept is explored world in new and interesting ways. Hell, give me 5 versions of the same concept and make them all different, please. However, even I have to admit that book 1 is almost a copy-paste of Dune. So there's a galactic empire ruled by powerful houses. Our protagonist is the son and heir of one of these houses, who struggles with the brutality of the world and is considered too weak. He's closer to his teachers than to his own parents. His dad is strict, his mum is sweet. Also, there's no computers in this world because AI once enslaved humanity, and now big calculations are done by highly trained mentalists. Also, his house is in charge of mining precious resources. I could just go on and on. Now, the story does become more original when Hadrian begins his space travel phase. Hadrian gets stranded on a backwater planet where he lives off the streets and fights as a gladiator. So things get a bit more interesting. Yet even so, this book is just very slow. There wasn't much that actually got my attention. It's not a terrible book, it's just a bit generic. That said, I actually had a terrible experience with the audiobook. Normally, I'm not one to care much about audiobook narrators. Narrators can do whatever voices they like, as long as I can hear everything loud and clear. Well, I could not hear this one loud and clear. I've never encountered an audiobook with more volume inconsistency, and it was just about unbearable. The narrator spoke like a public orator. He would start every sentence as a loud declaration and then trail off. I thrust my sword into the enemy. Then I slashed the one approaching from behind. And it was just up and down, every single sentence over and over for the entire book. I could barely hear the second half of every sentence. If I were a less stubborn person, I probably would have switched to a physical book at this point. But don't worry, from book 2 onwards, the story and this world really takes off. And they change the narrator. This is a great world with lots of cool world building ideas. My favorite part is the time it takes to travel. In this world, it's common to spend entire decades in a stasis pod as you travel from one planet to another. After all, space is big. Traveling takes longer than mortal lives permit, so travelers have to sleep through it. This is a great way to show the cost of space travel. Remember in storytelling that limits are more interesting than powers, and that goes for sci-fi technology as well. The time spent traveling gets even cooler when planning military strategy. If you want to rally an army, you may have to wait 20 years before everyone actually shows up. You may call an ally for help, but it may take them 50 years to even hear you. And you may race to save a planet from destruction, only to find that everyone was cannibalized by the Cielcin over 100 years ago, and there's no one left to save. Time can be merciless.
I'm afraid of time.
This also affects individuals and the culture of space travel. It's common for people to distinguish between someone's actual age and how many years since they were born. So someone might be 200 years old, but because of the space travel, they're only biologically in their 30s. This takes an extra layer of meaning when you include the lifespan of average plebeians versus the longer lifespan of the ruling elite. So the ruling class are known as palatines, and they are genetically engineered to live for somewhere between 500 to 700 years, possibly more. This means that many characters can easily live for over 1,000 years when you add travel time into the mix. And it means this story can take place over a millennium. That's how grand and epic this tale is. Another highlight of the series is all the space exploration. So Hadrian really gets around this galaxy. He meets so many weird and wonderful things across so many worlds. This is like Homer's Odyssey or Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, the classic story where every new location is completely different and has new discoveries or fresh horrors to explore. So full credit here, I never got bored while exploring this world. Another major world building feature is the incredible amount of history. This story is set about 16,000 years after humans left Earth. However, much of that history was lost due to the chaos of the time. All we know for certain is that humans invented AI and it nearly destroyed us. Humanity waged war against the AI all across the stars. We barely survived. So much of our knowledge from that time has been lost, to the point where Earth is now a holy word, almost like a deity worthy of worship. But it's not just our history, it's the alien history too. The Cielcin aliens are a major feature of the series. They get some of the most extensive world building of any fictional race. It's a lot. Let me give you a few highlights. So first, the Cielsen are unique because they don't live on planets. They live in space, constantly on the move in massive city-sized ships. Some of those ships are as big as moons.
That's no moon.
The aliens themselves are largely humanoid in shape, like us, just 9 feet tall and immensely powerful. They have mighty talons on every limb and huge horns on their head. In many ways, they look like demons. Worst of all, the Cielsen see humans as nothing more than food. They're not going to negotiate with us, make treaties, or even conquer us. We are nothing more than livestock in their eyes.
Home was a pen. Humanity, cattle.
The Cielsen operate in an elaborate caste system of ranks and roles. Every creature has a role and a place in their society, including the humans who serve as their slaves. The series spends a lot of time exploring the different Cielsen clans, their rules, and their ranks. Another defining trait is their language. Now, Christopher Ruocchio has gone to pretty extreme lengths to create a fictional language, and it features every chance he gets. Why have a conversation one time in English if you can have it twice, both in English and in Cielsen at the same time for every single line of conversation? Sorry, I'm just making fun, but I'm actually not sure how much of this language is truly fleshed out. I don't think it's going to be a learnable language on Duolingo like Klingon, but this Timu Klingon has come a long way. The final detail about the Cielsen is their religion. Now, their exact religious dedication will vary depending on the individual. Some follow their beliefs out of duty and honor, but many of them have extreme levels of fanaticism, and these zealots are the most dangerous of all. They see their conflict with humans as a holy war, requiring the utter conquest and subjugation of the enemy. So there are 3 common plot lines you'll see across the 6 books in this series. First is the aliens, either fighting or interacting with them. Second, the political intrigue. And third, archaeology, or searching through history. The alien plot lines depict a massive galaxy-spanning conflict over hundreds of years. This is where all the cool sci-fi explosion stuff happens. We also explore the Cielsen culture, their society, and most importantly, Hadrian wonders if it's actually possible to establish peace with them. This is definitely the primary conflict of the series. Next is the political intrigue, which is about the search for allies and forming of alliances in this war. This is where all the space exploration occurs. Hadrian travels all through the stars looking for allies, or earning their trust by accomplishing great tasks for them. This is important. Believe it or not, humanity is not a united front against the aliens. Even in the face of an extinction-level event, people still have egos. Also, the Solan Empire is not the only collective of humans. So there are multiple factions that need to come together if we are to survive. And third is the study of history. So Hadrian also explores the cosmos, looking for ancient secrets about old humans, the AI machines, and the mythology of the Cielsen. This is the plotline that has the most religious content, as Hadrian's finds signs of the supernatural and glimpses of the ancient gods. But that's all I'll say about that for now. The character writing is a little inconsistent in this series. You see, Hadrian Marlowe might just be one of the most detailed and nuanced main characters I've ever encountered in sci-fi and in greater fiction. We watch him grow from an idealistic young teenager into a hardened soldier and into many other things over the course of the series. And we see all of this through the eyes of the older version of him, who's writing this tale and reflecting on everything. So there is so much contrast and contradiction within his character as we see it grow and change over time. This gets even deeper when we look at Hadrian's beliefs. So he starts this story thinking that peace is possible, but soon learns that peace is complicated. He starts as an unbeliever, yet encounters more and more supernatural things. So it's not just that he changes, it's that his belief changes. So he's a fascinating point of view character. And yet, almost every other character in this series is incredibly boring. I know, I'm going to get pushback for that one, because there are key exceptions, and we'll talk about them momentarily, but most of the side characters across this vast, sweeping epic of a story are one-dimensional blobs that blur together. Hadrian has many followers in his Red Company, or people he encounters in his travels, and I actively tried to learn their names and backstories and tell them apart, and yet so many of them were completely indistinct from each other. This is just a bizarre contrast in a series that puts so much effort into the characterization of the main guy. But let's look at 3 noticeable exceptions. So we have Tor Gibson as Hadrian's teacher and mentor as a child. Where everyone else teaches Hadrian to be cruel and brutal, Gibson teaches that it's better to be wise, to lead with empathy, to earn people's devotion. Gibson is the voice of moral guidance in the series, and yet he himself is almost emotionless. He disciplines himself to always act with logic, almost like a Vulcan. So this contrast between his cold exterior and his teachings of kindness makes him a fascinating character. Volker Ondera is our secondary protagonist. She's a social outcast, partially because she comes from outside the borders of the Empire and has no respect for their authority, and also because she has some prosthetics, such as a fake eye that lets her scan for data. So Volker is pretty much a genius. Volker's whole thing is that she's an independent woman, but then she spends the entire story following Hadrian everywhere and doing whatever he asks with minimal protests, because she's so independent. Anyway, the final standout character is Basander Lin. Now, this guy doesn't get a lot of screen time compared to the others, but he's a great example of interesting character writing. Basander is a high-ranking officer within the Empire, who can pretty much speak on its behalf. He does everything by the book according to his strict moral code. Yet, despite being a total Boy Scout, this guy is full of surprises. His moral compass is incredibly nuanced and unpredictable. He is both likable and unlikable. Okay, moving on to a major theme of this series. Oh yeah, this is going to be everyone's favorite part. How is religion included in Sun Eater? Well, first, the series deals with ongoing supernatural events. Things that can't be explained or don't fit the laws of science.
That thing does not obey the laws of physics at all.
Every time this happens, there's a discussion around faith. Also, there seems to be signs of divine intervention. The more we explore the ancient history or the Cielcin cultures, we see rumors of divinity. Something is out there that is powerful and vast. Is it a god? Is it the god? And then there are the miracles. I will say nothing about these events specifically, but they are definitely clear, obvious miracles that cannot be explained. And of course, there are references and deliberate parallels to the Bible, subtle nods towards things that happened there. Finally, we meet actual Catholics in space. Space Catholics. And they spend a lot of time talking about their faith and their lifestyle. Now, when I was reading these books, I began to notice more and more biblical symmetry. Around book 3, I started wondering just how Christian does this thing get? And I found this wonderful post online where someone asked this very question on the Sun Eater Reddit page. They asked, is this series building up to a Christian message at the end, where it ends with the call to repent and accept Jesus into your heart? Also, is the war between humans and aliens meant to resemble Christianity versus Islam, with the Muslims being the flesh-eating monsters? The Empress Ruocchio replied, that's Christopher's wife, in case you didn't get that. She stated, no, in no way the Cielcin are not meant to be a Muslim group, and Christopher would never depict a group of real people as the evil guys. And also that the books were not meant to be preachy in any way. Instead, they simply explore themes of faith and skepticism. There's more to the online discussion, and I encourage you to look it up for greater context on that. So personally, I agree with that first point, that the Cielcin are clearly not Muslim. If anything, they're more like a cult. And I agree that the series is not trying to be preachy and convert people. That said, there is just a lot of religion, and I think just by sheer volume of content, it's inevitably going to be a little preachy. This is honestly where I may not be the most objective judge. I actually want to confess here, I may be an atheist now, but I'm a former Christian. I've read the Bible. You probably think I mean I've read from the Bible. No, I've read the whole Bible. And no, we're not going to do a video on it, but could you imagine? But all that to say, I'm someone who will see and understand all the biblical references in these books and not believe them, where I think most readers will either get the reference and like it,
I understood that reference,
or it will go right over their head and they won't care that much anyway. So ultimately, you're going to have to judge for yourself if you're comfortable with this much religious content. Do what works best for you. Now, I hope I didn't make you guys too mad at me, because I'm definitely about to do that now. In many ways, Sun Eater is a wish fulfillment story. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are many reasons why we read books and enjoy stories. Sometimes we just want to be lightly entertained and escape reality for a bit. And sometimes we enjoy a story because it makes us feel good about ourselves. We want to feel awesome and cool. That's why superhero movies are insanely popular. They are wish fulfillment. Stories like Sun Eater have a huge component of this. We all want to be Hadrian Marlowe. Physically stronger, long-lived, smarter, educated, and a fierce warrior who grows in fame and power. Everywhere Hadrian goes, people are awed by his presence and drawn to his leadership. He's the center of every room he walks into. And with all the divine intervention stuff, he has a certain level of Messiah/chosen one vibes going on. And that's all fine. Wish fulfillment is not a sign of bad writing, not necessarily. But I want to highlight this because lots of stories use this type of heavily romanticized main character. The romance genre is full of wish fulfillment stories, and every action movie ever. We can often be snobby and look down on these types of stories when it occurs in other genres, but when it occurs in our preferred genre, suddenly it's so realistic and amazing and the protagonist is legit me. But seriously, if you enjoy this type of story, go for it. Don't let anyone judge you for it. Have a great time. Feel invincible. If that's what you need, do it. But at the same time, many readers who intensely relate to this type of story will then take any criticism of that story very personally. How dare you criticize those books? That's me in those books. Anyway, just want to make you aware of that. Have I ruined the illusion now? There's a bunch more things I still haven't mentioned about these books because, as I said, it's a strong flavor. So what we're going to do now is split the remaining traits into strengths and weaknesses. And by a happy coincidence, there's 4 of each.
Perfectly balanced.
The first major strength of Sun Eater is the narration, and specifically, the narrator who gives spoilers. I love this writing technique so much. It's an obscure concept, it doesn't come up very often, but it's done extremely well here. So we'll read just an innocuous scene about Hadrian meeting a random guy. The scene doesn't look like a big deal, but then the narrator's like, "Little did I know I had just met my greatest enemy." And whoa, suddenly we're paying attention. Why is this such a big deal? Isn't that kind of thing a spoiler? Well, this is a clever technique because the narrator only tells us what is going to happen. They don't tell us when or how. And that means there is a crazy amount of tension introduced into the story. Another example of this is from Stephen King's It, where chapter 17 is literally called The Death of Patrick Hockstetter. The chapter title tells us Patrick's gonna die, and it's a horror book. This means every time Patrick is on screen for that chapter, the audience is just sitting there waiting on a tightrope of tension. This is like that old famous example given by filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock, where he said if a bomb goes off on screen, you'll maybe get 5 seconds of surprise, but show the audience the bomb hidden under the table at the start of the scene, and you'll have 5 minutes of tension as we wait for it to go off. So Sun Eater is full of tension because the narrator tells us what's gonna happen. We have a ticking time bomb situation that adds so much tension to the story. This is used particularly well in one case, where Hadrian has a close friend. Every time this friend is on screen, the old Hadrian as the narrator expresses sadness and regret for what happened to them. So every time this friend is on screen, we fear something bad is gonna happen. It's just excellent writing. But moving on, a second major strength of the series is quite simply the fancy prose. Oh my god, this guy has some seriously beautiful prose. I am frankly quite jealous. We have long sections of the book where old man Hadrian is reflecting on each period of his life, processing what he learnt at the time and what he has learnt since, analysing the world around him with such philosophy, depth, and wisdom. But that's all there is to say about it. The writing is fantastic. This honestly reminds me a lot of The Name of the Wind for the beautiful writing. But speaking of, there's another important similarity here. Remember how the King Killer Chronicles is about Kvothe telling the story of how he became the King Killer? But then after 2 books and 18 years of real time, we still don't have an answer? Or even the faintest hint of how it happens? Well, the third major strength of Sun Eater is we actually see progression towards eating a sun. It's not just an endless cliffhanger. We are not just sitting around wondering, when is he gonna eat the sun?
Just eat the damn oranges!
Now, it's true that after 6 books, we are still waiting for the big event to happen, but we've had so many of the details filled in. And I won't tell you any more specifics, but we know for a fact it's coming because the final book 7, Shadows Upon Time, is coming out this year, and all the pieces are in place. And I really appreciate this about Sun Eater. The story is always focused on the big goal and never loses its way. And speaking of consistency, the 4th major strength is a consistent character journey. Hadrian Marlowe is our one and only protagonist, writing the story in first-person mode. Since so much of the story relies on him, it would be very easy to just make him make whatever decision the plot requires to keep the story moving. Yet over the course of 6 books, his growth has never lost its way either. His journey of growing in wisdom and faith is always at the forefront of the story. Everything that happens to him fits with the established character arc. That's an incredible amount of intentionality in the direction that his journey takes him. Very consistent. That's 4 strengths. Let's move on to 4 weaknesses. Okay, first major weakness is the action scenes. I know I'm going to get pushed back for this. I know there's a lot of action here and it's usually done very well, but the problem is all the action scenes are very similar. Too similar. This is a bit hard to explain, so let me give you an elaborate example. Keeping with the sci-fi theme, we're going to look at the action scenes in The Empire Strikes Back, hence my shirt today. There are essentially 5 action set pieces in that movie. We have the Wampa scene, so we're going to call this Monster Attack. Then the Battle of Hoth. We'll call that a traditional battlefield. Then we have a bunch of scenes of the Empire chasing the Falcon through space, and we're going to call that a space chase. And yes, I know it's multiple scenes together, but I'm classifying it as one today. Then in the climax, we have 2 scenes running side by side. A running battle through a complex and the duel. Now, what do you notice about these 5 scenes? Each one is a completely different type of action. That's what keeps things interesting. Imagine if the movie just had 5 scenes of traditional battlefields, or 5 duels. Maybe it could work, but more likely it would get boring to see the same type of action over and over. So this is the problem with the Sun Eater series. Most of the action scenes are running battles through a complex. Now, I haven't counted up action scenes or analyzed page numbers into hard data, but my impression of the books leads me to estimate that about 80% of the action scenes are running battles. There is, of course, the occasional duel, and book 3 has a fantastic traditional battle set piece, and it's a standout scene across all 6 books. But the hard majority of action scenes are the same running battle, and they honestly become very repetitive over 6 books. Speaking of repetition, the second major weakness is between the primary characters. They have the same debate over and over, the "I don't want you to get hurt" debate. This one conversation is had almost continually from book 2 through to book 6. And it's always the same thing. Hadrian wants to go into battle, the lead woman wants to go with him, Hadrian doesn't want her to in case she gets hurt. And then they talk in circles for ages until she goes into battle anyway, and Hadrian shuts up until the next time when they have the exact same debate. This is just a boring conversation to have so many times. It's meant to show relationship tension, that's the function in the story, but there are other ways a relationship can be interesting. Instead of showing a genuinely sympathetic relationships with highs and lows and tension coming from multiple sources, we just have the same tension and same debate over and over. So the primary relationship, which is a big centerpiece of this story, is just weaker for this repetition. But there's a larger problem. The whole debate is only a question if you don't respect a person's freedom to choose for themselves. Controlling your partner for their own safety is still controlling your partner. Speaking frankly, Onyx Storm had the same debate and did it better.
What?
Yeah, I said it. In that book, the woman Violet wants to go into battle, and the guy Xaden says, "Is there any other way?" And she says, "Hey, I thought you respected my autonomy." And he thinks about it for a second and then says, "My head respects you, but my heart is scared." And this is much better. For one, they only had the conversation once, but it also gives us a clearer picture of what the character is feeling, making them more relatable. He talks about his feelings directly, instead of talking about the issue that has implied feelings underneath. Now, of course, I understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships, sure, and not every fictional relationship has to be healthy, but in this case, the healthier relationship was more entertaining too. I mean, even the Dresden Files did this better. Dresden is sometimes infamous for being awkward in the representation of women, And yet initially, the wizard Dresden is nervous about policewoman Murphy getting involved in the supernatural, but very quickly he has learned a lesson. He trusts Murphy as an equal, and from then on they go into battle side by side. So this whole debate made sense for Dresden because it led to character growth. That's what frustrates me about Sun Eater, is that Hadrian never learns his lesson and never resolves the issue. The debate doesn't lead to anything, it's just a circle, and it occupies space that could have been used for better things. And the third major weakness is retconning. There is so much retconning across the length of the series, changing what has already been established. In the opening book, Hadrian establishes a few truths about the world building, about the Empire, about the aliens, about history, and morality. Yet over the course of this series, so many things just get completely changed. Now, there is some justification. It's stated many times that Hadrian is too young and naive at the start. As a young man, he didn't fully understand the way the world worked, and that's why his perception changes over time. And to be fair, I really like this concept, that the world didn't change, you did. It's a fun concept to explore, and yet some of the retconning changes are actually hard rules. Let me give you another Star Wars example if you don't mind. When the Emperor uses Force Lightning for the first time, that was okay, because there's no hard rule saying he couldn't. But when Admiral Holdo uses light speed to destroy an entire fleet, there's like 40 years worth of hard established law explaining why it can't be done. That's what a hyperdrive does. It goes into hyperspace, which is another dimension. So, I appreciate that things change over time as the protagonist changes. I think that's very clever. But it happens so many times regarding some pretty firm truths that I think it becomes a problem. Even then, I will say in Christopher's defense, it is hard to plan a story 7 books ahead. People always point to the Wheel of Time or to Cosmia for planning a dozen books ahead of schedule, but those are exceptions. It rarely happens. I think it's very common for writers to start a series early in their career and then get stuck with the rules that they created and want to change them later. And Christopher has made an effort to explain the changes. So it may be a weakness, although I think it's an understandable one. And the fourth major weakness is too much reliance on religion. Now, everyone stay calm. I didn't say too much religion. I said too much reliance on religion. Big difference. There's a lot of big emotional moments in this story that only have an impact on the reader if they understand all the religious references and believe them. Not every reader is going to feel the intended weight of these scenes. I can't tell you how many times I read a significant event in these books and felt nothing. And I'm someone with big feelings, as you can probably tell. I usually feel everything.
So much pain.
But a lot of the emotion and a lot of the deeper themes of this story rely a little too heavily on religion in order to make an impact on the reader. Well, speaking of religion, it's time to finally discuss the big supernatural theme of this series. Our foundational rule in storytelling is you never want to rely on divine intervention. It's cheating. It takes all the satisfaction out of winning a victory, leading to anticlimax and plot holes. And yet, there are a couple of ways that you can make miracles work in a story. So let me give you 3 famous examples to explain how miracles can work and why, and then we'll look at the miracles in Sun Eater and compare. The first example is Avatar. Not The Last Airbender, James Cameron's Avatar. At the end of that film, the Na'vi people are losing the battle with humans. Then out of nowhere, all the local wildlife shows up and eats the humans. Neytiri even screams, "Eowa has heard you," directly referencing a god's intervention. Now there are 2 reasons why this miracle works. First, it's on theme. The whole story has been about humans destroying nature, so here we see nature fighting back. It's thematically consistent. The second reason why it works is the miracle doesn't fix everything. Yes, the animals eat a bunch of the enemy, but our protagonist still has to destroy the 2 biggest ships for himself and fight the antagonist to the death. That said, this is still overall a pretty weak example of a miracle because it completely saved the day, turning a certain defeat into a possible victory, so the divine intervention still intervened too heavily. It is weak writing, so I would grade it as a C. Passable, but it could be done a lot better. Okay, now our second example is going to seem completely ridiculous, but I am 100% serious about this. It's the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. At the end of... Sorry. At the end of that movie, SpongeBob has lost to Plankton. Then out of nowhere, he starts playing guitar, something that the movie has never shown him doing up until that point, and inexplicably, the guitar playing breaks all the helmets. Just cause his chops are too righteous. Look, I know it's a silly example, but it is still a much better illustration of a miracle, cause obviously, it's a cartoon, it's for kids, it's a comedy, okay? So those three things are obviously gonna make it easier to accept, but there's more than that. First, this works because the miracle didn't solve the primary conflict. The big goal of that movie was always for SpongeBob to travel to Shell City and retrieve King Neptune's crown. SpongeBob actually achieves this, so the miracle didn't cheat him out of his earned victory. Whereas in Avatar, the miracle fixed the central issue. And second, this whole scene was a character moment. The whole movie has been about SpongeBob trying to act like a man. They even sung a song about it.
Now that we're men.
But in this moment, he accepts himself as a kid, and yes, a goofy goober. So he didn't beat the villain because of a miracle, he beat him through resolving his character arc and through self-acceptance. It's much more satisfying. So overall, this is a pretty good handling of a miracle. I would give it a B. I can't believe I'm talking about SpongeBob SquarePants in a professional capacity as a writing example. What a life I live. Okay, final example is the best of all, from Pulp Fiction. If you haven't seen it, these two hitmen, Vincent and Jules, have just executed two victims when a third guy bursts out of the bathroom and empties an entire clip at them, but every shot misses. Vincent and Jules then debate whether it was just good luck or divine intervention. This works extremely well for two reasons. First, we don't actually know if it was a real miracle. The characters disagree, and the movie never tells us conclusively. So it's debatable whether this even was a Deus Ex Machina at all. That's how subtle it is. The miracle is not deciding the fate of the whole story. But most importantly, the miracle works because it's all about how it affects the character. Jules is shaken by this event. Previously, he was the most aggressive of the two hitmen, even killing this one guy with chilling casualness. But after this event, Jules rethinks his whole life. He goes out of his way to help the couple who robs the restaurant. He retires from being a hitman and steps away from crime altogether. Meanwhile, his partner Vincent stays in crime, and it doesn't work out well for him. I give this miracle an A+, because it barely interrupts the story, and most importantly, it's not about the miracle at all. It's about the character and what it means for them. Well, now we've learned a lot about writing miracles. What about the miracles in Sun Eater? How do they compare? So Sun Eater's miracles use the same two techniques as Avatar. They only solve part of the problem, and they're on theme, since faith is a big part of the story. Pretty much every time there is a miracle across the board, it uses these two. Now, we don't see any of those three techniques from SpongeBob, and they don't use the subtlety method of Pulp Fiction, because the miracles here are always very loud and obvious. However, the miracles do influence the character arc to some extent, and I think this is the area where they're most interesting to the story, in how they affect Hadrian and his views of the world around him. That's a fair bit more effective. That said, Sun Eater has one huge problem that all my other examples didn't, and that is quite simply that the series has more than one miracle, and that changes everything. The first miracle is really interesting. The second, maybe a little less interesting, but by the third they're becoming predictable. We have come to expect miracles, and therefore, so much of the tension is removed from the story. We are never concerned about the fate of our characters because we know a literal miracle is going to save them. Maybe they'll save themselves sometimes instead of always requiring divine intervention. Or maybe some characters will die and the miracle only saves a few. But ultimately, the primary danger has been removed. And that's the biggest problem I think this series has. Even though the miracles continue to use the same techniques to make them work, they've used those techniques too many times. Now the constant Deus Ex Machina has fundamentally taken too much tension out of the story. I mean, Hadrian already has plot armor since we know he survives to the end of the story to write the life story down. But add miracles to the mix, and this guy has the most extreme god tier plot armor I've ever seen in my life. So to rate these miracles accurately, we have to divide them up. I would rate the miracles in the early books as a B-, but the miracles in the later books I have to rate as an F for failure, because they don't work anymore and I think they negatively impact the story. Let's see how. I heard a rumor that books 4 and 5 were actually intended as one book, and the publisher made him split it in two. I don't know if that's true or not, but it does explain a very significant problem in this series. Book 4 is the darkest out of all the books, whereas book 5 is very much a phoenix rising from the ashes. They're meant to go together. Think of them as a duology at the very least. But book 4 on its own kind of felt bleak and pointless. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I really did not like book 4. I did not enjoy reading it. I've seen other booktubers say this too, that book 4 was too dark and too miserable. But that didn't bother me. I'm fine with dark and miserable. I mean, I watched the Terrifier movies and had a great time. Because extreme violence and brutality doesn't bother me, because trauma. What does bother me is boredom. And this book was boring. The real issue is twofold: captivity and miracles. Hadrian spends the majority of book 4 in captivity in a hopeless situation. And yet we know that at some point a miracle is going to get him out again. I spent the whole time sitting through one horrible torture event after another, painfully waiting for something to happen. And this is where the Deus Ex Machina has the most negative effect on the series, because you know it's coming.
I am inevitable.
Plus, captivity can very easily be a dull plot line, because the plot isn't moving and the character has no agency. But look at Shawshank Redemption. I know I've used this example before, but the captivity storyline has to have a goal they're striving for, or some small ways of fighting back. Otherwise, the story just goes into waiting mode, as we wait for something spontaneous to end the captivity. So heads up that book 4 is a low point in this series. But many of those plot lines are then picked up again in book 5 and improved from there. I won't lie, I was tempted to just skip this segment because it's not great, but gotta talk about it. The representation is not great in this series. First, this is a very male-dominated story. There are very few women, and they are pretty much always in supportive roles. If not always, at least most of the time. They rarely, if ever, make any important decisions. There are major political and military planning meetings that decide the fate of the universe that has only dudes in the room. Speaking frankly, there are precious few women in the series who feel like real characters, and because there's so few, they kind of feel like tokens. There is some racial diversity in the form of people from different planets with different cultures and ways of life. And there's plenty of different classes too, with palatines and plebeians working together. That said, the obvious social imbalance between these classes is never seriously questioned, which disappointed me. I thought that that's what was being set up in book 1 with the obvious social imbalance. I was hoping for something more like Dune that was going to warn people of charismatic leaders gaining too much power. But Sun Eater does not go into any of that. In fact, it kind of goes in the opposite direction. There is some disability rep, with Volker having prosthetics. There are some queer characters, a few side characters are briefly mentioned as being gay, although to be totally honest, I couldn't really remember them, and I had to research this online to confirm if they actually existed because they were there so briefly. That said, the whole series has very poor depictions of transgenderism in ways that are actively harmful. There are two groups of creatures that are gender non-conforming. One is the Cielcin aliens, who have no gender. The Cielcin are the major antagonist of this series and commit unspeakable acts of barbarism. The books use the pronoun it to describe them. And the second group is the homunculi, so genetically engineered humans, known as homunculus, who are literally bred for servitude. They are almost entirely mindless and have little ability to think and act for themselves, and they serve the ruling elite of the empire. They also have no gender, and they also use the given pronoun it. So there are two types of gender non-conforming people in this world: mindless automaton drones in perpetual slavery, or hellish nightmare monsters who literally eat babies. If there were just one group that had poor gender non-conforming representation, then I might be forgiving, but two groups seems like a pattern. Personally, I don't know if I would call these books transphobic, but if you call them that, I would not say you're wrong. So do with that information what you will. If you choose not to read these books for that reason, I completely respect that. And if you choose to still read these books, that's fine too. Just be aware of this issue in this book and don't swallow that narrative. Remember that trans people exist and do not deserve to be dehumanized for their differences. Trans rights are human rights and always will be. Regarding the content warning, this series is pretty damn violent and can be quite graphic, even to the point of having some light body horror. There is torture, there is people getting eaten by monsters, there's people being dehumanized into slavery and barbarism, and acts of brutality committed by both humans and Cielcin. That said, there's not much else to worry about. There's only the vaguest sexual references, and there's some swearing, but it's extremely sporadic. That's about it. Gotta love stories like this, where you can commit any atrocity you like, but God forbid we see nipples. Is the ending worth it? So remember, the 7th and final book, Shadows Upon Time, is expected on the 18th of November this year, 2025. We'll see very soon if the ending is gonna be worth it, but it's really hard to judge now, because book 6 has done a lot of setup. Things are tense right now, borderline cliffhanger. A lot depends on the quality of the final book, so we shall see. And how much should you try? Well, this series does vary a little bit in quality. First of all, book 1 is not a true reflection of the quality of the later series. If you want to get a good idea of whether the series is right for you, you've got to read into book 2, Howling Dark. That said, I personally think that books 2 and 3 are the peak of this series. They have some excellent sci-fi storytelling. Now, as I mentioned, I do think book 4 is a low point, and books 5 and 6, in my opinion, they struggle to recapture the earlier excellence. By this point, some of the weaknesses in the series have become a little bit more pronounced, like miracles taking too much tension out of the scenes. I am hopeful that book 7 will resolve everything in a satisfying manner. I trust Christopher Ruocchio at this point to deliver and wrap up the series in a neat little package. Let me know if you would like a follow-up video on Sun Eater 7 at the end of this year. But that's all from me today. I hope you now know if this series is bad or brilliant for you. So good luck and happy reading. Well, thank you for watching this super long video. Coming up next is our final sci-fi installment, the Foundation series, and I just cannot wait to start on that classic, hugely influential series. I hope you'll join me for that. Remember to do all that YouTube stuff below to help me out, I do appreciate that, and if you want to go the extra mile, I have a shop, Patreon, and my own books, The Immortal Investigations. Checking those 3 things out will really keep things going around here. I love you guys, and I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!